So we're working on a 2006 Chevy Impala, 3900 V6, and I'm getting a message of engine hot, AC off. The engine's not hot, I'm certain of that. It's got plenty of coolant in it, which you would check the coolant here or in the reservoir back there. I also first changed the coolant sensor, which is in a very awkward place by the crossover pipe here up against the engine. That did not solve the problem. So doing some more reading, apparently if your engine warms up too slowly because the thermostat is open, either open all the way or partially open, you'll get that same message. So normally, a thermostat is where the radiator hose, which is what we're looking at there, where it meets the engine block, right at that clamp. That's normally where it would be. On this car, it's backwards. It's actually, and it's tough to see, it's actually the bottom radiator hose. Right where that light is shining, there's a clamp. An aluminum housing just to the left of it there in the view. So I'm going to see if I can sneak down in there and take the two bolts out to hold that on. And that is, I'm hoping, the problem here. I'll put a new thermostat in it, flush the air out of the system, and fill it back up, and hopefully that'll solve my problem. So just trying to get a little more light on the subject. There's two bolts, one just to the left, right about where my fingertip is on the left side of that thermostat housing. And there's another one over here. There's a plastic twist tie on this wire, and there's some kind of special twist tie that snaps over the end of that bolt. I don't know why they went through all that effort instead of just twist tying on the air conditioning line right there. But so I'll cut that off and use a long screwdriver to pull that plastic piece off the stud, and then it just looks like two sockets. So I'll tell you what size socket in a minute, and that's a factory clamp. So you could just grab that with a pair of adjustable jaw pliers and slide that back to get out of your way, and then twist the hose. So you're going to twist the hose like this once you get that clamp off to break it loose, and then slide it back. So one of the things you're going to need to do is drain the radiator, and it's tough to see, but right at the bottom of the left side of the radiator there's a screw, a thumb screw. So you turn that counterclockwise, and when you do that, water will come out at the bottom of the radiator. Oh, I'll try and show it to you. Water will come out right there when you turn that knob. So I'm going to put a drain pin underneath it and open that valve and let it run out, because if I don't, all it's going to do is pour all out of this bottom hose when I take that clamp off. That's going to happen anyways. I'll try and salvage some of my coolant because that coolant's relatively fresh. I'll drain out what I can, and then I'll pull the hose off, and when I take thermostat out of the engine, a bunch of coolant is going to drain out the front of that. You're going to lose a bunch. Just less going down the drain. Try to save as much as I can, and then refill. So that's what it looks like when the antifreeze is coming out. And I've got a pan laying under it. So I just loosened, hard to do multiple things at one time. I loosened that screw, the big plastic screw on the bottom of the radiator, and now the antifreeze is just coming out, going into the pan I have underneath it. Helpful tip: if you loosen your cap, the fluid will come out faster. The antifreeze will come out faster, because I had that on tight, and when I had that screw loose, it was coming out, but I was hearing bubbles in the overflow tank, so it was trying to suck air through the overflow tank to let the antifreeze out at the bottom of the radiator. So I just loosened that. As soon as I did that, it's like glug, 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 stopped in the overflow, and now it's running out more smoothly. So I'm just waiting for things to quit running.
So in order to get that tie wrap off that's pressed over the end of the stud, I just took a long flat screwdriver, put it between the nut and the plastic, and you can see the screwdriver's against this bracket right here. It's a nice solid place for it. And I just really gently just pried down, and that thing slid right off the end of the stud, so no big deal. I'll even be able to save it. So now you can see I totally have that wire off. You know, that was just sitting up on the end of that stud. Pull it away. There you go. Now I have access to this, so I'm going to need a deep socket. I'll figure out what size in a second. The other one I don't need a deep socket for, but that explains why in other videos it showed, one long stud and one short. I was wondering why that was. Because the long one holds that wire right there. So the next step, I'm going to take that, this is a really tight environment. I'm going to take that clamp off right there. You can't see it because this hose up here is in the way, but there's a couple of ears on the edge of the clamp. So I'm going to grab with these pliers, adjustable pliers. That's a one-handed deal. I should be able to grab the ears, squeeze it. I'll go back and forth and slide that right down the hose out of my way. And then I should be able to twist the hose to get it off there. As soon as I do that, there's going to be a bunch of coolant fall out. I've got most of it drained out of the radiator. The rest that comes out, it's just going to get lost. So now you can see I've slid the clamp down out of the way. There's the ears I was talking about. You just pinch those together, and when you pinch them together, it'll make the size of that clamp increase just a little bit, so you can work its way down the hose out of the way like it is right now. So this is probably on here pretty good. This is a 2006. This has never been off the car. That's the original hose, I think. I should replace it right now, but I don't think I'm going to because that hose looks like it's okay, and I'm kind of in a hurry. So I'm going to squeeze it a little bit, pull it down off of there, and that should give me free access to the thermostat housing then. Wow, it's like Christmas. Oh, wait a minute, it is Christmas. I just pulled that hose off there with no tools at all. It came right off after I slid the clamp out of the way, of course. And I thought, why is it? Oh yeah, I remember. I replaced a radiator in this car before, so I did replace that hose, and it's been off before. And I've cleaned this neck before. There's a little bit of rust on it, so when I get it off, I'll clean it up. But we're doing good now. So now we need to figure out what size tool that is. We'll do that next. Okay, so to get our handy-dandy bolts out, one with that stud on it, the other one is just a short bolt. I'm going to use a 10 millimeter 6-point long socket, and I have a stubby ratchet that happens to swivel as well. I think that will work fine, and I already put the socket on the thermostat housing, and the length of the socket is just enough to get past the length of the housing itself, so I should be able to swing the ratchet without any additional extensions. So we will try that out, and I should be able to get that out in just 1 second, as long as those bolts are not stuck or rusted or break off, which I would be really, really unhappy about. Okay, so this job is actually going great. Those came right out, no problems. The way it sits on the car is like that. So it's a little bit of an angle, and it's pushed up in the engine. You want the long part, the spring, inside the engine, because that's where it's going to sense the hot water. So there's two studs, as we could kind of see before. There's one bolt, and then a bolt with a stud on it. And now we know the reason why the stud is long, because that wire clamp sits over top of it. Kind of an expensive way to solve a really simple problem, but okay, GM factory. Bolts are great, no rusting, came right out. I only needed one hand to do it. And by the way, although I have the car on a jack, don't need it. Everything that I've done so far, I've done from the top. I'm 6 foot tall, so I have fairly long arms. But I've been able to do everything from the top. So if you have to do this, in a muddy parking lot or something, it's possible to do it. But now I see why I was getting the error. Because, I don't know if you can tell on film, but where my thumb is, it's a big chunk of rubber hanging up in the way of that thermostat
where the thermostat itself is coming apart. So it's a ancient item ready to go to the scrap yard here in a second. I'll pull that out and I'll put the new thermostat in just the way it is and pop it back in there and we're good to go. And I'm going to just lightly sand this off to get the fuzzy edges off of it so it's nice and flush. I'll do the same thing on the engine side. And if it's a little wet with antifreeze, you don't want to use regular sandpaper because as soon as the water hits it, all the sand will fall off of it. You need to use waterproof sandpaper or dry it off really good, either one. But you're not going to be doing too much work to it. You just don't want it to be, rough and real bumpy when you put it back together. But I'm really happy with how it's going. And on this neck, there is some rust right here. I'll go ahead and clean that off too. It's in pretty good shape because apparently I cleaned it off when I changed the radiator a couple of years ago. But I'm confident that's what the problem is now that I see the thermostat in my hand. Okay, so here's my new thermostat. The spring on the back, that's the one that closes the valve. This one on the front, the coarser one, that's the one that opens the valve. So before I put thermostats in, I always take them in the house, put them in a pan of water, put them on the stove, and boil some water and make sure that it opens before the water boils, because this thing's $20, which is not a tremendous amount of money, but I don't want to have to go through the effort of putting another one in because the new one I bought doesn't work right. So I always check the new ones before I put them in just to save myself some aggravation. This one opened just fine before the water boiled, so we're good to go. Okay, it's tough to see, but back there, right at the tip of my finger on the engine is that flange, and I've cleaned it off as best I can. You can kind of see the half moon of it back in there. There wasn't much on it. I just used a little bit of Scotch-Brite, and it came right off. And I cleaned my thermostat housing, and we're in good shape, and ready to put it back on. By the way, in case you forgot, see that little nub right there? That's the top. When you put it on, it goes like that. Okay, lesson learned. The recess that you have to clean out to set the thermostat in, that doesn't have to be clean. It needs to be squeaky clean. I mean, nothing at all in there. It needs to be perfect. That rubber fit is, it's a pretty serious press fit. And I was wondering in the store why you can buy that rubber seal, just the seal without the thermostat. I'm like, hey, the seal comes with the thermostat. Why would you ever take the car apart and just replace the seal? Because if you're not careful when you put these together, you'll rip it. And then you're going to have to either buy another $20 thermostat or a $3 seal. Buy the $3 seal. But if you clean that recess out really well, and you have to put it in kind of like you're pressing in a bearing. You want to get it as flat as possible and just work your way around it a little bit at a time, and it'll slide down in there. I didn't lubricate it with anything. You could probably lubricate it with something to help the rubber slip in a little bit, but I got it fit in there, and the way it acted, it was like that recess. It wasn't a square shoulder. It was like there was a cup to it. So when you got it past the edge, then it got a little bit easier to get in. But do that very gently or you're going to rip your seal. Okay, so we got our hose back on down there. We have the clamps on, the hose is on, obviously. Next to it, the wire is put back over the stud. That went on very easily. And don't forget, those are very small studs. And if you get carried away, you will snap them off, and that's in a really awkward place. That would be really tough to fix. So be gentle, you'll be fine. That doesn't have to be cranked on there. It's got a rubber seal. You can do that by feel. You just want it snug. So I'm going to fill. And, oh, by the way, I went down there, that plug on the left side of the radiator here. I turned it clockwise to put it back in, so push it in the hole. Just push it straight in and then turn it clockwise until it seats. That's got a rubber washer on the bottom of it too, so just tighten it until it's snug. Don't crank it or you'll break it off. It's plastic. No tools are required. You can just do it with your fingers. So I'm going to fill that, and I'm going to make sure that that's full, the overflow. And I've got the orange coolant in it, the lifetime stuff. Well, I think they call it lifetime, or 100,000 miles, which neither one of them describes my car, because I usually keep it over 200,000. So lifetime doesn't mean lifetime for me. So I will fill it up, and this car is known for getting air bubbles, and there's no good way to bleed it without specific methods. So I'm going to use my airlift, which is a vacuum tool that you put on the filler neck, and it pulls a vacuum on the system to get the air out, and then you basically siphon antifreeze into it as you replace the vacuum with antifreeze. So I will try that, because the last time I did it, I got a big air bubble in it. I didn't like the results on that. It didn't hurt the motor, but it was a lot of extra hassle. So I will do it with the airlift this time. Another helpful tip: I use my drain pan, obviously, to collect the antifreeze. Well, it's on the bottom of the car. You're messing around. Chunks of dirt are falling off into your pan, getting your antifreeze messed up. So when I poured it out of there, I poured it into a filter that I had equipped with my wife's pantyhose. She had one knee-high that was a orphan that didn't have any holes in it. So I put that over the filter to strain anything out of it before it went in my jug. And now it's easy to pour, and it's clean, and I can keep using it. Okay, so I put the airlift on there, and I routed the outlet into my overflow tank, so if it's spitting some coolant, it just blew it back in my overflow instead of throwing on the engine or on the floor. And it's holding vacuum now. I don't know which is better for you to see it, with or without the light. But it's holding vacuum, and that's right about where I shut the valve off. So I'm ready to backfill that last bit of coolant. I read the instructions on this. This is only the second time I used airlift. I read the instructions on it. It said to do it on an empty system. If you don't do it on an empty system, it may spit some coolant. So I didn't fill it up, but I did put some in it that got it within 6 inches of the neck or something. So it did spit a little bit. No big deal. If you do this, you don't make a mess anyways. I'll have to try it one time on an empty system from the beginning and see what it does differently, if anything. But I think it will work just fine. And I'm happy to say it's holding the vacuum. So if you've not used an airlift before, this is how you fill it. Basically, you take off the connector, you shut the valve, you take off the connector that I had that was blowing out into the overflow, because that's what you use when you're creating vacuum on the system. Then, before you open the valve, you connect the feed line into your container of good fluid. Open the valve. As soon as you do that, you'll see the vacuum line drop, vacuum needle dropping down, and it's immediately sucking fluid in the system. And it goes really fast while the vacuum's high. It slows down a little bit as it gets down to the end until you're on zero, which is where I'm at now, so it stops sucking in. So there's going to be a little bit of air in the system, but the air is going to be at the top, where it should easily purge out. So that's the principle of an airlift system if you've not used one before. By the way, before I take this off, see my vice grips? The overflow tube that goes over there, it's below where the rubber stopper shuts off for the airlift. So if you don't plug that line, it'll just be sucking vacuum through your overflow tank and bypassing, and it'll run indefinitely without building any vacuum. So I folded this hose, which is flexible anyways, folded it in half, wrapped it with some paper towels to insulate a little bit from my vice grip jaws, and then just closed down on it. And that sealed it so that I could pull a vacuum on the system. Without doing that, this doesn't work. Okay, so quick recap on the tools that we need for this job. Maybe I'll put this at the front of the video. I just finished. Here's the tools I actually used, and we'll start with what you must have and what's nice to have. You're going to need some coolant. Because I use a pan, which is an optional thing, if you're not necessarily ecologically friendly, you don't need a pan. I saved all my coolant as much as I could, so I used a pan. If you save it, you need less coolant. So you need coolant. You need a new thermostat. This is the old one, as an example.
Make sure your new thermostat has a seal on it. You can buy that separately if you tear yours when you put your new one in. I used adjustable pliers to get the hose clamp off. I used a 6-point 10mm long socket, and a 3/8 ratchet is what fit my socket. And this one is, in addition to being a stubby ratchet, it's also a flexible, which was nice, but I didn't need it to be flexible. You know, a 3/8 ratchet with a long 10mm would work, and you can use a 12-point if you want, because those were put in pretty lightly. They weren't stiff. So I think you could use any kind of 10mm long socket and ratchet fit on it. So that's what you must have. I also used the long screwdriver to pop the wire clip off. You could use something else. I could have used those pliers. By doing it that way, it's really simple. I didn't break it. I got to reuse the clamp. Again, I used the overflow tray to catch as much coolant as possible to put it back in because the coolant was relatively new. I wanted to keep it. And I used, obviously, a hose. You could do it without a hose. Just bring a couple gallons of water over to the car to do the job if you have to do it in a parking lot or something. Just you're going to spill antifreeze on the car. Things are going to be sticky. You're going to want to wash it off eventually if you don't have a hose to use. And then as far as optional, you could do it without this. It would just be a little more hassle. I have an airlift, which pulls a vacuum on the radiator, on the cooling system. So by connecting that to the cooling system, pulling a vacuum, then you can backfill the engine without having air in it, and you don't get air bubbles, and it doesn't overheat. Going through several warm-cool cycles, you'll eventually burp the air out of them most of the time. I stress most of the time. So if you have access to it, do it. It's a good idea. And then I had to use the vice grips to seal off the overflow hose so that when I was pulling a vacuum on the system, it didn't leak through the overflow tank. So, must tools, nice to have tools, and further nice to have tools. And then just start the car up, let it run, warm up, turn your heat on, your fan off, and just let it warm up, and it should be fine. Check your temperature gauge and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. So mine, which I can't see right now because I had the headlights turned off, mine's already warming up, and it's almost at normal operating temperature in just a few minutes. So that's a good sign. And then I'll make sure when it gets to the middle there, or about the middle, that the radiator hoses are both warm, which lets me know water's going through the radiator, as opposed to just sitting in the engine. So those hoses are both on the left side here. One on the top, one on the bottom. So all in all, probably took me an hour and a half. I took my time. I wasn't in a hurry. I did everything just the way that it needed to be done. And I probably took extra care than I needed to. If you had to do the job in a hurry or something, you could get it done faster than that without those extra tools. It was just a little bit of a luxury. All right, good luck.